First, some mission setup. I'm dropping 2 helicopters into the mission. And I'm going to drop 2 known points, which will eventually be the landing zones for the helicopters. I'm going to use the top-down view in Armour to place them in a clear area. Just going to pull the platforms back a little bit so I can give them a waypoint path towards the landing zones. I'm going to name the platforms so we can see what we're dealing with. First platform, Jeff 11. And the second platform will be called John 12. I've also added those to the label field of the platform properties so that I can see it on the MACE map. Now I'm going to give the landing zones their own call signs that make it easy for me to find them in the scripting interface. So I've got Jeff LZ and I'll have John LZ, and of course I'm going to add their call sign names to the label field in properties, so again I can see them on the map nice and easily. Now the manual way of sending a helicopter to land is to place the name of the landing zone, the call sign, into the properties field of the helicopter who is to land there. So in the case of Jeff, I'm placing Jeff-LZ in his landing zone call sign. And John-LZ in John 12's landing zone call sign field in the properties. When I start the mission, all I need to do to get them to land is to select the aircraft, go to the entity controls, go to the maneuver drop down and select either land or RTB. You'll see the platforms have their icons have an L appended to the bottom left, and they start heading towards the LZ where they will eventually land. All the time they're in the landing sequence, I can move those known points and they'll update their position and land there eventually. Just for effect, I'm going to use the detonation tool to play some smoke down on the LZ, and we'll be able to do this automatically later. So that's a lot of clicks to achieve something that we should be able to achieve in a much more semi-autonomous way in scripting. So as always, when I'm editing missions, I stop and reload before making changes. Okay, so now we come to our first script. I'm just going to shorten the waypoint paths so that it makes testing a little bit faster. Okay, I'm going to add a new script, and this script is going to be a simple trigger and action script to land the helicopters at a known landing point, i.e. the landing point that's in their platform properties. I'm going to add a trigger. This is an entity trigger based on arriving at a waypoint. So here I choose Jeff11, and the trigger is that when Jeff11 arrives at his waypoint, that trigger will be met. But I'm going to add a second trigger for Jeff12 to arrive at waypoint 1. And dependent on whether I make these or and triggers, one would need to be met for an or trigger, or both would need to be met for an and trigger. But in this case, we'll use it as an or trigger. Now I'm going to add the action, which is land, and I'm going to apply it to John and Jeff, and they will both be given the tactic to land. I'm going to save my mission, which I always do before testing. They're going to play, and we're going to watch to see when the triggers are met. Jeff11 is approaching waypoint 1. That trigger is met. Only one of the triggers needs to be met because they're or triggers, and the script is executing. Assign tactic land to both aircraft has been given, and they both have the small L in their icons, and they head towards the landing area. Now I'm going to create 2 additional landing zones. I'm just going to use the simple Mission Builder duplicate platform tool to do this, and I'm going to rename them. So this one's going to be Jeff LZ2, and I'll rename the other one John LZ2, and once again I'm copying their call signs into the label field of the platform properties so I can easily see them on the map without having to display all call signs. So now it's time for our second script. I'm going to disable triggers on this first one and then make a duplicate of the script. All I have to do is rename it something sensible. This time I'm making the triggers and triggers. That means that both conditions have to be met before I can land there. With triggers, if I don't hit the persist met box on the trigger, then those triggers will only both be met at the same time if they both arrived at the waypoint simultaneously. So in order for it to work as the way I want, I need the triggers to have persist met ticked, so that when one gets met, the trigger stays on, and when the other gets met, that trigger stays on, and then they're both met. This time in the actions, I need to use assign landing zone in navigation 1 to tell each helicopter where their landing zone is. In this case, I use the map picker tool to pick straight from the map, and I assign this one to Jeff11. I basically do exactly the same action as a separate line item in the list and choose another landing zone call sign for Jeff12 and apply it to him. Now I can still use the same land as a tactic for both platforms, because when I hit that button they will both look at what their new landing zone call sign is that we've picked in this script, and they'll both initiate the landing at the same time. So now I can save and test again. So this time both aircraft will need to have arrived at waypoint 1 before the AND trigger is satisfied. I can see one has already been satisfied and it's staying on because of that persist met condition. And now the second has been satisfied and the actions have completed. The landing zones have been set and the assigned tactic has been given. If we look down at the landing zone now, we can see that Jeff has Jeff LZ2 and John has John LZ2. We can see the icons have the L's on and they're on their way to their new landing zones. Once again, I can just detonate some smoke on the LZ for effect, and we'll look at how we can automate that in the next script. Do note at the moment here that this assigned tactic says executing, it doesn't say complete, and that's because I've got wait for action to finish in brackets after the action, and that's an option, and we'll need to look at that if we're to have smoke appear before the aircraft hit the LZ in our next script. For our next script, I want to do a repeat of the last one, but this time I'd like smoke to go off automatically when my aircraft get within a certain range of the landing zone. To do this, I'm going to use the range ring function in platform properties so that I can display a ring of 500 meters around one of my landing zones. This will help me assess whether the script is working or not as the aircraft transition into that range of the landing zone. Now, as before, I can make a copy of the previous script and rename it something sensible. I'm going to leave the triggers the same and the landing zone actions the same. This time I'm going to add an action, which is delay until, which allows me to insert a trigger into the action sequence. I'm going to delay until Jeff11 is within a certain distance of Jeff LZ2, which I've just picked off the map. And in this case, I'm going to say is within 500 meters. And that will allow the actions to continue in the list once this trigger has been met. Now the action is detonate munition, and I'm going to select the smoke munition. In this case, I'm just going to pick a location off the map, but we could also select an entity for this, like a known point. I'm also going to change the environment here, just to give some wind drift on the smoke. So in the environment tab, I can set the surface wind direction and speed, and that's going to happen at the same time as the smoke goes off, so we should see some drift from the north. save the mission and test. My triggers are active. Remember, both helicopters need to have gone through waypoint 1 for these triggers to be met, and because they're persistent, one will stay met and wait for the other one to be met before the actions continue. They're now both met. The landing zones have been set. The assigned tactic landing has been assigned, but in this case I've messed up because I forgot to change the option that says wait for action to complete before proceeding. If I do nothing now, the smoke will only detonate once the aircraft have landed. But I can still test this out whilst the mission's running and make the change when I edit afterwards. I can untick the wait for action to finish before executing the next action. You can see that the action sequence has now proceeded to execute the delay until platform proximity is 500 meters of Jeff LZ2, which has just happened, as we can see on the map. And we can start to see the smoke blooming at the location and drifting southwards with the new wind direction. So what I need to remember to do here is stop and reload my mission and then change that parameter on the assigned tactic land to untick wait for action to finish before continuing with my other scripts. And now for our first buttonized script. I'm going to make a copy of the script as before, but this time we're going to make a script that we can use in any mission based on the entity we select and a landing zone that we select when activating the script. So we're going to land at a user selected LZ. Just going to remove the smoke aspects for now. And I'm going to remove the assigned landing zone that is specific to this mission because I'm later going to change it to one of the script string variables. I'm going to remove both triggers as well because the trigger to land will be the activation of the script. It won't be conditional. Scripts with triggers in become conditional scripts. Scripts without triggers in are activated immediately. I'm going to go through each line and get rid of the ones I don't want and then change these from mission variables to script variables. So I'm going to use the script variables because they can be used in every single mission. So I'm going to change the landing zone call sign to the script string variable, which is a user input at the time the script is activated. I'm going to change the assignation of the landing zone to the scripted platform. So whatever's selected at the time, when I select the landing zone, it will be applied to that platform that was selected. Now, to buttonize the script, I hit the Buttonized button. I can save it in one of my folders, and that's where it will appear on the scripting bar. In this case, I'm saving it in my helicopter scripts folder. I can choose an icon if I want, or I can place an icon in that folder. I'm just going to choose any one, but this time I'm going to make sure that I choose a user input, so show a map selection button, and I'm going to allow the user to select a platform or a location as the landing zone call sign. I've saved that, and now I'm going to test it in the mission. So this time I'm not activating scripts off the scripting bar. I'm going to select a platform and then use my newly created button that will appear in the folder on the scripts toolbar. Open my folders, instant scripts, and I can find my scripted landing zone. I get a selection icon and I'm going to click on John LZ2, and that inserts a new script into the scripting window, and it's applied it to who I had selected at the time, which was Jeff11. If I open up Jeff11's properties, I can see that his landing zone has now been populated with the call sign of the entity that I selected on the map, which was John LZ2. So that's a very simple buttonized script. We can do it again for the other aircraft and choose a different LZ. Again, this activates a new script, and it basically populates wherever there's scripted platform, it populates the call sign of the platform I had selected at the time, and wherever it says script string variable, it populates it with what I clicked on when I was given that selection tool on the map. This is exactly the same as normal scripting, except it populates with things based on the context of what's happening at the time, and that means you can use it in any mission rather than just one mission where you're referring to specific call signs, specific landing zones, or specific locations. The next script is going to allow the user to select a point on the map and create a landing zone where there wasn't one before. So I'm copying the original and changing the name. At the moment, our script allows us to select a landing zone on the map, but we want to actually create an entity. So our action now in the mission 1 is create a platform. Now I can create anything I like, but it's important to give it a reasonably complex call sign so that it doesn't conflict with anything else that could be in a mission. And I can create any platform I like. I could create a helicopter landing zone, but in this case I'm just going to create a known point to show that you can actually just land at known points. And the location is going to be at the user selected point, which we've seen before is given as the script string variable when the script is activated and the user gets the map selection tool. So I inserted that action at the top of the script. We can still have the platform land at the script string variable because it will now be the name, well, it'll be the location of the new platform. But what's better is to save the new platform's call sign in the script string variable, because then if we decide to move that newly created landing zone, then the aircraft will land in the new place, whereas if I just left it as a location, I can't really re-choose the location. So when creating the platform, I can save the new call sign as a script string variable, and now my aircraft will land at the call sign rather than the location. The other important thing to remember is that we might want to use a script multiple times. So if we are going to use it multiple times, every time we create the platform, it will be created with the same call sign. So as part of this script, we need to delete that landing zone when we're finished with it. So I need to insert an action to delete the landing zone. That's in the same tab as the Create Entity tab. It's just a little bit lower down. And what I'm saying is delete the script string variable. So it's a good job I saved the new platform there, or else it wouldn't be able to delete anything at all. I need this to happen at the right point, so I'm going to insert a delay until trigger into the script because I don't want it deleting before the aircraft's landed. And what I'm going to do is, rather than change the aircraft landing action to wait until action's finished, I might want to add things like smoke and things like that. So I don't want to be dependent on that action completing. So I'm going to add this delay until and make a proximity trigger for the aircraft proximity to the new landing zone call sign, which is going to be in the script string variable. But I'm just going to add an additional delay afterwards just to make sure that the aircraft has gone through its landing sequence before deleting the new platform. I can save this as I did before into a folder of my choice. It's still an instant script because there's no triggers. I can choose an icon. And again, I need to be sure to allow the user to select something off the map. But this time I only want them to be able to select a location because we're going to create our own platform. So I think that's ready to go. I can save this and test it out. So the aircraft I've got selected will be the scripted platform when I activate the script. I activate the script and I get the map selection tool. This time I can click on a location and it has created a known point, and if I press Control to see the call sign, you can see it's the call sign we specified in the script. And if I go into the platform properties and look at the landing zone, we can see that the landing zone call sign has been populated with that call sign. If we look at the script itself, we can see the scripted platform is Jeff11 and the script string variable is now been changed to LZ00001, which is what we asked it to do. We asked it to save that call sign. And now you can see I put the landing zone in a pretty rubbish place, so I can move it whilst the helicopter's en route and it will still land at that point. Whereas if I hadn't saved that call sign as the script string variable, it would have just carried on to that location because we're not actually moving the location. Here we go. We're looking for, we've seen the platform proximity trigger is completed and there's an additional 15-second delay just to make sure that the landing happens, and we should see the platform underneath disappear. And if I move the helicopter, you can see that in fact that known point has now disappeared and can be used again. So if I select the second helicopter, I can activate this script again without fear of a duplicate call sign being created. And there's another known point created with that call sign, and the aircraft will proceed to land there. We can see it's populated in its landing zone call sign list. We can see the scripted platform and the script string variable as before. And we can see that the script is now just waiting on the platform proximity. Speed the mission up. The platform proximity trigger action number 3 in the list is about to be met. There it is. It gives us the additional 15 seconds while the aircraft lands. If we zoom right in, we can see the platform that we created delete itself. And that's the end of the script.